Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Consortium for School Networking, or COSN, and the Panasonic Foundation, we welcome you to a discussion today about the improving of the process of buying educational technology for your schools. I'm Ann Ware. I'm a COSN project director for the collaborative work between two professional learning opportunities that are taking place that COSN is involved with. One of those is Collaboration for Innovation, Advancing Equity and Excellence. And the second one is Teaming for Transformation, Continuing the Journey Towards a Digital Conversion. Today with us, we have a representative from Digital Promise, and we're thrilled to have Phil Martin with us today, again from Digital Promise. Phil leads the education marketplace initiatives at Digital Promise. Digital Promise, if you don't already know, is a congressionally authorized nonprofit organization. They have a mission to improve the opportunity to learn for all Americans through technology and research. And I know that both the work of Collaboration for Innovation and Teaming for Transformation certainly centers up with that mission. Phil's policy portfolio, and he previously was at the U.S. Department of Education. Again, his portfolio includes student aid programs, civic education, financial literacy, and open data. Phil has also been a political organizer with AmeriCorps member and a coordinator of civic engagement programs at Princeton University. Phil has both an economics degree and an MBA. Today, Phil will be talking with us about or sharing insights from Digital Promise's report that came out. They were in collaboration with the Education Industry Association at the very late of last year, of 2014, titled Improving EdTech Purchasing. The report, I think, has great insights for both of our groups that are with us today. It identifies key obstacles and solutions around purchasing or procuring technology tools, with many of you working towards personalized learning environments. So today we'll hear from Phil about takeaways, lessons that have been learned from the report, maybe some comparisons from different sized districts that, again, will hopefully influence your work. We're going to ask today that if you, those of you that are with us in the chat area of there in the Google Hangout on Air, we're going to ask if you would please to list your district's name so that we know who's with us today. We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask your questions or make comments to Phil also, and if you will enter those into the chat area, then we will ask those as they are posed. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Phil.
Super. Thanks so much, Ann. In the spirit of Teaming for Transformation, Ann and I are going to team up. She'll drive the slides we see there, and I'll talk through them. Thanks so much to COSN for having us share what we learned through the study. And actually, COSN helped get the word out about the project early on and recruit some of the districts that participated. If you're interested in interacting with us online, either during this session or in the future, you can follow us at Digital Promise. And for this session, you can use the hashtag EdTechMarket. So I'll go to the next slide, Ann. Please.
There you go.
There it is. So just to set up the problem, what is it that we set out to learn about? As you know, over 14,000 school districts in the United States of different size and different instructional needs. Next slide. And more technology products available to choose from. And so the next slide. The bottom line is it's difficult to match the right tools with the right teachers and students. And our study focused on learning software. We know it's not the only thing that matters, but because of the variety of software programs, the challenge of finding and choosing them, it seemed like an appropriate focus for our study. So that was the kind of the challenge that we set out for ourselves, was to understand why is it hard to match the right tools with the right teachers and students. What's the process that's used, and how could it be better? So we go to the next slide. So we talked to both providers and educators And the next slide. And they were from 54 school districts across the country and 47 companies. The districts were large and small, districts you know very well and some you've never heard of. And the companies, similarly, big companies that do lots of other things in addition to learning software, as well as a number of startups that are getting into this work for the first time. On the district side, we thought it was important to hear from a variety of perspectives within the school district. So we spoke not only with superintendents, but also technology directors, academic directors, business officers, and principals. And then in the companies that were all higher level executives, so either CEOs, vice presidents for sales, those types of folks. Go to the next slide. Well, so we'll just talk through that. You can see. So what I want to just share here is kind of the takeaway in general about perceptions of the procurement process of how schools find and acquire learning technology tools and how companies figure out what schools need and sell what they have. In general, the providers, and so what this is trying to show you is if you look at where the red box is, the red bar and the yellow bar are that shows where companies are very unsatisfied or unsatisfied in general with the process of school district procurement for learning technology tools. And you can see among the school district folks, there are, I'm just going to go back here. Among the school district folks, they're much more satisfied with the status quo when we've asked the general question, how is EdTech procurement working for you? And so the blue and the green bars that are pretty high there for superintendents, CTOs, principals indicate that in general their level of satisfaction with the process as it is pretty high. Companies pretty low. And by the way, Anne mentioned in the beginning we worked with the Education Industry Association on this project. That was very helpful to recruit companies to participate in the study. And we also worked with Johns Hopkins University to conduct a study which included both surveys and interviews. Let me go to the next slide. So I'm sorry for that the formatting here is a little bit different than in other settings, but you get the picture. We want to point out here that although districts in general are rather satisfied with the process, they're not happy about everything, and we'll talk more about that. So, for example, 43% of curriculum directors in the study indicated they're not satisfied with the amount of time taken for bringing learning technology tools into the classrooms. That it's taking too long. Providers, of course, not surprisingly, even more frustrated with the amount of time taken, where just about 3 out of 4 are not satisfied with the time. Go to the next slide. I'll share 6 key highlights, and just before that, to say kind of why might this matter? So why should we care about companies feeling like it takes a long time to sell their stuff to schools? Well, a couple of reasons are that they say that it matters for the products that they're developing. And in fact, we had 6 out of 10 companies in the study say that the procurement requirements directly influence their product development. And about the same number, 6 out of 10 say that if procurement were more efficient from their perspective, then the costs of those products would decrease. So that's, we think, a good reason for districts to kind of pay attention to this issue, even if in general it doesn't come to the top of the list of the things that they're concerned about. Though, as we'll see, there certainly are some challenges from a district perspective as well. So we can go to the next slide, Ann. So the first of kind of 6 takeaways that we'll share is that the needs assessment process that school districts use to figure out which tools to bring into the classroom is rather general and rather informal. The kind of need problem definition that schools often start with is something like, we need tools to get better in math in the middle grades, not a more granular assessment of what are students of type X, not so good at, and what are the kinds of instructional tools we think would help them get better. So we can go to the next slide. So we think that to improve fit, kind of before getting to product search and selection and purchasing, we think just starting off with a really clear picture of instructional challenges and priorities would help the districts make sure that they're aligning their acquisitions with their need. And if those needs were communicated to the market, that would help companies figure out what to build and who needs their product the most. You can go to the next one. So the second takeaway is that end users, and in this case, we really talk about teachers and principals, not very involved in the process. We go to the next slide and see what that looks like. So when we talk to folks within the school districts and at the companies, we asked who's involved in the process to what degree. And what they told us overwhelmingly was that chief technology officers and curriculum directors are the most involved in the decision-making process about bringing EdTech tools into classrooms, with students and parents the least likely to have voice in that process. That makes sense, maybe. A lot of the decision-making is happening at the district level. It's also interesting that the people who are using the products, students, and those who are facilitating that use, teachers, are among the least involved in the process, and it's quite different from other industries where consumers are buying the things that they're using themselves. And we can go to the next slide. This one also a bit tough to see, but the heading there says CTOs and principals disagree on the desirability of decentralized purchasing. On the left side, you have CTOs responding to the question, do you agree or disagree that it would be a good idea to have schools buy their own stuff? And the red and yellow is I disagree with schools buying technology products on their own. And the green and blue is good idea, schools should buy their own stuff. And you can see, perhaps not surprisingly, principals favorable to the idea of decentralized purchasing on the right-hand side there, whereas chief technology officers not so keen on the idea of decision-making and purchasing happening at the school level. So we think that this is an important takeaway from the study, that there's a tension within the district about the appropriate venue for decision-making and acquisition, and that tension needs to be worked out. How is it that districts can bring voice from teachers and students and principals and other folks at the school level into the process, the decision-making process about the tools that are available in the classroom, while recognizing the benefits of centralized decision-making that some districts have argued for in terms of equity, interoperability, and cost efficiency justifications for centralized decision-making. So we don't have an answer there. We think it's definitely an area for continued work to figure out that tension. You can go to the next slide.
So Phil, this is Ann. One quick comment. In the through teaming transformation, that the work that COSIN does with school district leadership teams, we're really finding, and it's probably would be somewhat obvious, we're really finding that districts where the CTO and the CAO have a really close working relationship, that you don't have that kind, we have less of that kind of problem, where they are, lack of a better word, kind of on the same page about what's good for today's students for learning. Then we find that their success is much, much greater. Yeah, just a quick point I wanted to share.
No, that makes a ton of sense. So the third takeaway is that the discovery part of the process is really hard for districts, and we can go to the next slide to see an example of this. And so here's an assistant superintendent saying, if there's a good vendor out there doing wonderful things, it's hard to find that vendor. There's a ton of anxiety and stress that comes through a lot of the open-ended responses from people in the study, talking about the number of phone calls they get, the challenge of finding what they're looking for, the ever-changing products in the market. What comes across so clearly is the difficulty of finding and sorting the products that are out there, and figuring out what's a good fit. And we'll see later that the companies experience this discovery problem on their end as well. And so it's kind of before the purchasing can even happen, just the kind of matching, the fit is a tremendous challenge right now that really came through. The next one. So the fourth takeaway is the limited evidence kind of out in the marketplace about these products that indicate the likelihood they'll be successful with students. You can go to the next slide. And so here's just Chief Technology Officers, for example, 29% of them are satisfied with the credibility of evidence they get from companies about their products. So fewer than a third of CTOs feel like they can trust the information from companies about the effectiveness of their products. And again, CTOs identified as the most important, most involved stakeholder in the process, and have very low levels of trust of the information in the market about the likelihood of success of those products. And we think that's hugely important, that there are a ton of products out there. There's a lot of information out there about those products, and districts are not trusting. I see a question from Anne, and says, you find that districts try to identify success metrics before partnering with a vendor partner. Yeah, so we asked them, to what extent do you rely on different things for making your decision? And on our website, there's a short report that has some graphics, and it shows that they're more likely to rely, and this is a little to, I think, maybe the next finding, but more likely to rely on pilots within their own district than they are either rigorous, what they term rigorous evidence, or kind of anecdotal evidence in the market for their decisions. So yes, they say that they would like to see evidence of effectiveness, but because of this kind of trust issue and potentially a perception of uniqueness, that their students or teachers are different than others, they rely heavily on kind of metrics that they've developed themselves with their own teachers and students. And actually, it's a good segue. We can go to the next slide. Actually, so here's just a perspective of a provider saying our internal efficacy rigor is rarely an asset because few districts know how to assess or differentiate vendor efficacy claims. So this is somebody in a company saying, why should I bother investing in really rigorous research that will prove success of my product in certain contexts if I don't think that school districts are savvy enough to recognize that as strong evidence compared to the stories and anecdotes they get from somebody else. So that's a perspective of a company, but it's an interesting one. And I know, Anne, you talked before this session about the importance of professional learning to among your members, and one aspect of that might be, what's the right kind of data literacy that is required to make sense of different claims, kind of statistical literacy, research literacy, whatever you call it. How is it that administrators and teachers and people who support them can make sense of the information that's in the market and make good choices based on what they see? So go to the next slide.
Quick question for you, Phil, with regards to this slide that we're currently on. So we know that kids being actively engaged in their learning has merit, and we know about that, taking ownership of their learning and that type of thing. And so I often hear districts say, we want our kids to be engaged, and we're going to use X product to do that. And so do you hear much from the vendor partnership community around how they are able to communicate how a certain product will help to engage young people in their learning, and maybe there are some metrics there that can be agreed upon as districts begin to use certain solutions?
Yeah, that's a good point and a good question. What we're seeing is that there's kind of a minimum threshold, which is like, is the product being used at all? And it's sometimes the case. So I was with schools in New York City at the iZone. A great subset of teachers in the district that are in schools committed to integrating technology into teaching and learning to support their mission. And one of the things these teachers said was, we often buy stuff at the end of the cycle that we don't really need because it's time to spend the money,
Sure.
and then nobody uses it. So I think that the low threshold is, is anybody using it at all? Does it meet a need that we have? And that would be kind of the first part. And then maybe the next level up would be, so what does that usage look like? How frequent is it, and how effective is it? And we're doing some work with schools this spring to try to develop some metrics just for that. Not only that, but including student engagement. How is it that schools can understand the extent to which teachers and students are engaged with the product, and then and kind of what that means in terms of like academic improvement, depending on what the area is. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to surface out some examples of those kinds of metrics for the end of the year.
Thanks, Phil. I know that both of the groups that are with us today and those that will be watching this Hangout later will be very interested in that spring, so I'll circle back up with you this spring. Thank you.
The next one there. As I mentioned, what we observed, perhaps as a kind of reaction to the limited trust of the information that's in the market about products available, there's a heavy reliance on pilots for product decision making in schools. The pilots, though, are not often well structured to generate information that's more trusted than the information that's already out there. And so we can go to the next slide for perspective on that.
Phil, as I mentioned earlier, lots of the districts that we work with sometimes start, with a pilot, and so I know that information that would kind of give some general guidelines around to know that your pilot's going to be somewhat successful. Here's some bottom line things that you should consider. So maybe we'll look for that sometime in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Up there, that's great. There, it popped up there. So here's one perspective from a CTO. Pilots become a license for teachers to use the product. There's no real analysis done. It's a real challenge. So what we're hoping to understand by working with a handful of school districts this spring, and we'll do some public engagement coming soon also to gather perspectives from others, is what does a really strong pilot look like for the purpose of improving decision making as part of the procurement process? How does the needs assessment happen so that the product that's being piloted is directly addressing a need that's been identified, ideally with teacher voice in that process? What's the evaluation methodology for figuring out, what does success look like? I'm piloting a program because I want to see if it does a certain thing with my teachers or with my students or both. How am I going to measure that? And then finally, how do I make sure that that information that's generated from the pilot is incorporated into the decision making that happens afterwards, and isn't just kind of delaying a process that would have happened anyway. So we're excited about doing that work, and we heard from both sides of the market in the study that 8 out of 10 companies and school district folks said, kind of raised their hand and said, hey, we'd like help doing pilots to make better choices. So we're already doing it. We'd like to do it better. So we hope to be able to make a contribution there. We can go to the next slide. And it's going to be another messy chart. By the way, these you can download these if you go to our Twitter handle. We've posted some of these slides, and there's more on our website. I'm sorry, these aren't coming through so clear. But what this is trying to show, and I won't maybe talk you through the graph so much, but Companies are moderately satisfied with the opportunity to conduct a pilot in the first place. That's the green and blue bars on the left-hand graph. But they're less satisfied with their ability to scale up after a pilot. If you see the blue and green bars on the right-hand side, and some of that is totally expected. Not every pilot is going to turn into a purchase. Not every test is going to have positive results, and that's why people are trying these things to see what works in their context and what doesn't. But we also did hear that there's not enough clarity on both sides, from the company's perspective and the district's perspective, about what does it mean to do a pilot exactly, what's going to happen, how will decisions be made, and so we think that there's opportunity for increasing clarity there about what happens during and as a result of the pilot. Go to the next slide. And finally, in general, providers are really struggling in what is a buyer's market. We can go to the next slide. So just for example, 23% of providers in the study say they are satisfied with their ability to gain visibility in a district. So, but one out of five companies are saying, hey, I'm okay with how schools find me, and the rest are struggling to kind of rise above a crowded market. We can go to the next one. And so even lower here, 11% of companies satisfied with the information they have about buying cycles and purchasing policies. So the companies are feeling the discovery squeeze themselves, the challenge of kind of rising above in a crowded market. They're also even more frustrated with the inability to get information from districts about what they need and how they do business. And so we think that's one of the reasons for this disconnect. Go to the next slide. So that's lots of things that are not ideal about how the process works now, to bring tools to the folks who can benefit most from them. So what can be done to improve it? We'll go to the next slide. We identified a number of recommendations in the report. You can see that on our website. So I'll just share a few of them here, and if you like, we can talk about these or others. So the first is focus on needs assessment. That's really what is driving the decision in the first place to go out into the market and look for tools to support instruction. And what we observed in the study is that that's quite general, quite informal, and really could more time and rigor could be applied when it comes to problem definition, needs assessment, including incorporating voice from teachers and potentially students to make sure that the products that districts are bringing into the classroom are the ones that they need to accomplish their objectives. The second is really improving this pilot to purchase process. For better, where schools are saying, we need to try it first before we decide to scale it up to a large number of classrooms. And that process right now is rather informal, and we think for districts to be able to rely on that information that's generated from a pilot, that some added rigor would be beneficial for purchases where it really matters, where getting it right matters, and they feel like the information in the market isn't good enough, then the pilot probably needs to be structured in a way to generate information that is trusted, and that information needs to be connected to that purchase decision. So not learning a lot and then just kind of losing the learning by not having informed the purchase in the end. And the third here is looking at this idea of performance-based contracting. So if the pilot is to say, what did we learn about the likelihood of this product being successful with our students? A contracting approach could say, we're the district, will pay for this product if it meets our expectations of success of our students, whether we identify that that measure from a pilot or from evidence we got from a company about what they say the results they've achieved elsewhere. But we think that some kind of mechanism to put an incentive in a contract for results is worth exploring. It's something that's happening in other industries. We've done some work on this with the White House and other folks coming together to look at this idea of pull mechanisms like social impact bonds and prizes, and how they can drive effectiveness of interventions. And so we think that there's some opportunity to explore that in the education technology market. So many other recommendations came from the study. We found lots of things, but these are three I thought I'd focus on today. And so just go to the next slide.
Phil, this is Ann. One point here. With
Please.
all three of these, it seems that the more common language there is from all users as to what the expectations are for use and what they hope the results are, it seems that would hold some merit, so that a teacher and a student, an assistant principal and a principal and a parent all understand we want X we hope bring X to happen, and here's how we define X. And it seems that if the provider and everyone understands that common language, that you have a better shot at it being successful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So here, what's the problem? What's the likelihood that the product is going to help us address it? And how do we ensure that it does what it's meant to do?
Sure. Okay.
So to kind of sum up, we think that that this matters, that education technology procurement matters. There's a lot of money being spent on a lot of products. There's a tremendous opportunity for technology to support the teaching and learning mission of schools if the right products get into the hands of the right teachers and students. Right now, there are some things getting in the way of that, and we think that there's a lot of work to be done to improve the fit. And if we can do that together, then we'll have teachers and students really benefiting from the opportunities that digital technologies bring to our classrooms. So we're going to be doing some work, as I mentioned, on understanding and sharing kind of best practices for pilots as part of the procurement process, and as our next step after this study. And we look forward to other work in this area, and look forward to connecting with other folks who are doing similar work that we can learn from. We'll just go to the next slide there. Conclusion. So this is how you can connect with us. That's where we are. If you go to that web page, you can find the full report. We've got everything from a really accessible, highly visual version of the report to the data file that you can download to see all the survey responses yourself and do your own analysis, and various things in between. You can continue to connect with us on Twitter at Digital Promise, and feel free to reach out to me with any follow-up questions or suggestions. That's where you can reach me.
Phil, thank you so much for this information today, and I'm going to leave this slide up here in case people are taking down the Digital Promise Twitter handle and the hashtag at EdTechMarket. We'll be sure to share out the resources from Digital Promise with both of the groups that we're working with, again, that being Teaming for Transformation and Collaboration for Innovation. We really encourage those that are with us today and those that will be listening to the recorded session of this to really spend some time on the Digital Promise website. You will find their resources that will help you from reinventing what we call the proverbial wheel. And Phil, we look forward to following back up this spring with Digital Promise to hear more about your work with strong pilots and see how that, what information comes out of that. I think it's really, really important work, and see how that work takes place this spring.
Awesome. Appreciate it, and thanks Kosin, for helping us with the study in the first place and giving us a chance to share what we learned today.
Thanks again, Phil. And then for those that are with us, we encourage you to join us in Atlanta, March 16th through the 19th of 2015, where COSIN will have its 2015 conference with a focus on enabling your digital leap. I'm sure, Phil, there will be many conversations there between providers and educators around specifically things that we've talked about today, and we look forward to pointing them to Digital Promise for that information. That brings us to the end of our Hangout today. Again, thanks to Phil with Digital Promise, and we thank everyone that joined us. And we'll be following back up with C4I and Teaming for Transformation 3 with next developments of this work. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.